As always, a thinker like Evola proceeds from the individual and goes to the individual. This can give thinking of this sort a slightly unreal aspect for many people. Where are the masses? Is the democratic majority? Where is the BBC vote that decides? The truth is, Evola's not concerned with the BBC vote. He's not concerned with the masses. He regards the masses, and the sort of theorists who go along with him regard the masses as sacks of potatoes to be moved about. His thinking is completely anti-democratic, Machiavellian to a degree, and even manipulative of the masses, as long as it's done within an order of tradition within which all have a part. Evola dates the decline of modernity from, in a sense, the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the Renaissance, but many thinkers of a similar sort date the slide at other times. Evola's a Catholic, and once asked about his religious peculiarity, he said, or particularism, he said, "I'm a Catholic pagan," which is a deeply truthful remark, dialectically. I'm not a Christian, but if you look at it from the outside, the core or part of Christianity is obviously Roman Catholicism, even though I was technically brought up in the Protestant sort of forcing house of Anglicanism, a wet sheep religion if ever there was one. But Anglicanism, of course, is a syncretic religion, it's a politically created religion, a bit Catholic, a bit Protestant, but not too much, and with a liberal clerisy at the top that's partly Protestant-oriented within it and exists to manage the thing. One of the truthful, although this is en passant, one of the truthful asides that can be made about Anglicanism, and the reason why it's been supported even today through state establishmentarianism, when virtually no one attends these churches at all, except the odd old lady and immigrants from the third world, is that it's a way of damming up some of the extremism that does lurk in religion. Religion is a very dangerous formulation, as the modern world is beginning to understand. I remember Robin Cook, who was a minister opposed to the Iraq War and so on, and died on a Welsh on a Scottish mountain. All that obsessive walking, when one's thin and red-headed, can lead to undue coronaries. But Cook once said, when we were young, and he's a son of the Manx, like most of these Scotch politicians are, in other words, he comes from a Calvinistic background to a degree, he said that in his early life he thought, with the general Marxist and Freudian conundrums, that religion was over. And now, towards the end of his life, this is just before he died, he said the dark, clammy, icy hand of religiosity in all sorts of systems is rising again. And secular leftists like us, he's speaking of himself, and those who believe in his viewpoint, are feeling the winds of this force coming from the side and from behind them, and it's a force that they don't like. I personally believe that, as with Evola, that people are hardwired for faith. Maybe 1 in 10 have no need of it at all. But for most people, it's a requirement. The depth of the belief, the knowledge that goes into the belief, the system they come out of is slightly incidental. But man needs emotional truths. George Bernard Shaw once said that one man with belief is worth 50 men who don't have any. And it's quite true that all of the leaders of great movements and those that impose their will upon destiny inside and outside of particular countries have considerable and transcendent beliefs, philosophical, quasi-philosophical, religious, semi-religious, philosophical melded into religious, and vice versa. Without the belief that there's something above you, and before you, and beyond you, and behind you that leads to that which is above you, we seem as a species content to slough down into the lowest common denominator, the lowest possible level. Evola and those who think like him believe that this is the lowest age that mankind has ever experienced. Despite its technological abundance, despite its extraordinary array of technological devices that even in an upper pub room in central West London you can see around you. It is also true, and this is one of the complications of his sorts of beliefs, that some of the methodologies that have led to this plasma screen behind me would actually be denied by elements of some of the religiosity that people like him would put forward. But that's one of the conundrums about epistemology, about what you mean by meaning, which lurks in these types of theories. The interesting thing about these beliefs is that they're primal. Turn on the television, turn on the radio, the World Cup is just about to begin. Everywhere there is trivia, everywhere there is celebration of the majority, Everywhere there is celebration of the desire for us all to embrace and become one world together. I met somebody recently who said, I don't want to be English. He said, I don't want to be British. He said, England's a puddle, he said. I want to step out. He said, I want to be a citizen of the world. I don't want to have a race. I don't want to have a kind. I don't want to have a group, even a class. I don't want to come from anywhere. I want to be on this planet. This planet is my home. Well, my view is that sort of fate universality. Maybe he should get in one of these little dinky rockets and fire himself off into some other firmament. Because this is the home that we have and know. And the only reason that we can define it as such is by virtue of the diversity of what exists upon it. But the number of people who wish to retain that diversity and the pregnant meanings within it seem to get smaller and smaller with each generation. The politicians that we have now are managers of a social system. It's quite clear that we do not have three ruling parties, but one party with three wings, the nature of which are interchangeable in relation to gender, where you come from in the country, class, background, how you were educated, and whether you arrived in the country as a newcomer in the last 40 to 50 years or not. Now, Evoler's step back from what has made the modern world leads to certain radical conclusions about it, which are spiritually and politically aristocratic. Most people are only aware of the left-right split as it relates to a pre-immigration, slightly organic society where social class was the basis for political alignment. Bourgeois, centre-right conservatism of some sort, centre-left, Labour, social democratic, trade unionist, and so on. Now we have a racial intermedley that it complicates even that division. The distinction between the aristocratic and upper class attitude and the bourgeois attitude, which is as pronounced as any left-right split between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, is that which Evoler advocates. Evoler believes in some respects in masters and slaves, or certainly serfs. He believes that the merchant and those who deal purely with economics have to be subordinated to politics, to higher politics, to metapolitics, to military struggle. He believes that the warrior and the religious leader and the farmer and the intellectual stroke scholar stroke craftsman artist are uniquely superior to those that make money. And nearly all of Evoler's views are in some ways a form of aristocraticism in a way. If you look at all of the sports that he favours, fencing, mountaineering, they all involve lone individuals who prepare themselves for a task which is usually dangerous and which can usually result, mountaineering for example, and his book Speculation on the Peaks, in annihilation, and creates, if you go wrong, but it creates an extraordinary and ecstatic sense of self-overbecoming if you conquer K2 as a Peruvian mountain, the Eiger, the Mount Everest, and so on. And even in the more populist forms of mountaineering, the sort of bearded upper middle class, Chris Bonington sort of cheery mountaineering, as you might call it, there is a streak of aristocratic, devil-may-care and Byronic license. The bourgeois view is, why do that? It's dangerous, it's pitiless, you can be hurt and injured, there is no profit, it serves no higher reason than itself. For Evoler, the reason and the purpose is the reason to do it. It is the stages that you go through and the mental states you get into as you prepare and you execute a task which is dangerous. And the same analogy can be extended to martial combat. The same analogy can be extended to sports like ancient wrestling. Modern wrestling is a circus, of course, where the outcome is largely decided by the middlemen who negotiate the bouts between clowns, who can still damage each other very severely. But ancient wrestling was a bout that ended very quickly, and which was essentially religious, which is why the area that they wrestled in was purified with salt in most of the major traditions, and so on. Fencing. Take away the protective gloves and gear, and you have gladiatorial combat between people who are virtually on the brink of life and death. And these are the sorts of, only one step removed, even from Olympics fencing. It's noticed that in the contemporary Olympics, a movement that was founded in modernity on the Grecian ideal, nearly always founded by aristocrats, all of the early victors in shooting and fencing and all these early sports are aristocrats. Of course, the early Olympics have their funny side, Many of the female athletes that won early Olympic competitions were transsexuals.